wow, there is so much information and energy stored in our bodies and our tissues that, whether we're conscious of it or not, often mandate our behavior. I sometimes say, like, there's a difference between isolation and loneliness. So, right, isolation means we can literally be by ourselves but feel connected to our community, to the world around us. I think what a lot of people are feeling now is actual loneliness. So I'm around people all day, but I feel alone, right? And that's like an existential grief and sadness that I think is often true for people.
Always not guaranteed tomorrow, and the only thing you can truly embrace is the now. Hey friends, you're tuned in to the Learn or Be Learned podcast, a show where wisdom meets curiosity in order to discover the human experience. I'm your host, Shiva D, and remember, you either learn from or you're learned from. Now, let's get back to the show. All right, welcome back, friends, to another great episode here on Learn or Be Learned. Today's guest is Jason Lange. He is interested in men's health, mental health, and just discussing about mindset, today's day and age, and how to, better yourself, better your mind, and, overcome this sense of loneliness and things of that nature. So, Jason, thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm stoked to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. And, before we dive right in, I think it would be good for the audience to kind of get a background of what's been going on and how you got here. So before we do that, I think if you don't mind, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So my journey and the work I now offer in the world are deeply entwined in that it really all sprang from my own path of, how to grow and heal and try to become the most whole, present, vital and alive, connected version of myself I could. And, I grew up with a lot of privilege here in the States and, kind of lower middle class in the Midwest, white man, and had most of my basic needs met growing up. But my family did not have any real skill or sense of interiority. So like emotional connection or presence with each other. It wasn't that it was unloving. It was just not something that my family knew how to do. And in particular, I didn't have a very strong connection with my mother growing up. And, lo and behold, as a kid, you just deal with it, and then became a teenager and hormones start changing and start getting interested in women and start to have this experience of, wow, I'm really uncomfortable around women. Like my body gets anxious. I don't know how to talk. I don't feel comfortable. And that pain really kind of took me on a journey of, okay, there's got to be a better way. Whatever I'm feeling doesn't feel very good. I don't actually feel good in my body. And that eventually got me into personal growth and transformation and studying consciousness, which all really culminated when I first started experiencing men's work in men's groups in my mid-20s and embodiment work, in a sense, somatic work. And things really started to shift for me. And that began, a 20-year journey I'm still on today of growing and trying to change. But in the process of that, fell so in love with the work that other men started to ask me, about some of the stuff I was doing, and that kind of pivoted naturally into, wow, there's a lot of men in pain these days that don't know what steps to take to just be more fulfilled, frankly, and to feel alive. And so my work started pivoting more and more towards supporting other men, which is mostly what I do these days.
Right. A few things here. I strongly agree that, after basic necessities are met, emotional connection and connectivity is so important. And unfortunately, oftentimes it's not even the fault of the people before you, parents, grandparents. It's just generationally passed to the point where someone has to break it, right? Which is why I found it so interesting when you said, you mentioned talking about consciousness, which is essentially just a state of awareness, right? Becoming aware of
Mm-hmm.
really everything that's been going on. So, I love that. I love that you said that this is still a journey, because partially this show, we talk about the human experience and everything. And that partially is the human experiences. It's just a never ending journey. There's no destination. It's really just a dance of learning, uncovering more and more. Right. So I love that.
Exactly.
Yeah. And, before we dive right into the, men's mental health and stuff, because I know that's really important. I'd love to take, the foundational blocks of that, about how you learn more about consciousness, becoming aware of yourself, and, your, feelings when you were around women, and, social settings, maybe even public speaking, things of that nature, right? Getting out of your comfort zone. What was that like?
Yeah. It all really started, for me, it started more mentally and philosophically. So I was pretty lucky. I think I was maybe 19 when I discovered the work of Ken Wilber, who's one of my big mentors and kind of a big American philosopher that deeply influenced the way I understand human growth and see the world, and actually culminated in me moving to, a town he was running a nonprofit in my mid-20s to kind of work for him, where I got just dove headfirst into the transformational kind of swimming pool, in a sense, because there was some of the best stuff in the planet happening there at the time. But it started for me mentally. So philosophically, just trying to understand how the mind works and, what's happiness and mindset. But it was through that community, in that work, that I discovered the importance, right, of our bodies and the nervous system. And so that really began my journey of somatic work, which was the process of, okay, in my mid-20s, as I kind of really dug in, I cognitively knew why a lot of stuff happened in my life, and it made sense why certain things weren't working. So I knew it, but I wasn't feeling any different, if that makes sense. My experience in my body was pretty much the same. And so that work really got me into the path of, somatic therapy, somatic healing, and shadow work in men's groups, which was really just the process of coming back into contact with my full bodily experience, which in the work I do with men and humans, includes our emotional experience. And so, the moment things really cracked and I was like, whoa, okay, there's a whole different world out there, was one of my first deep kind of somatic men's groups. I was working with this male mentor of mine. I had been in therapy for maybe a year and a half. And, I was pretty sophisticated mentally. So I could kind of, control that one-on-one relationship with my therapist and reveal certain things and talk about it and kind of be vulnerable, but not really be vulnerable. I was pretty mentally acute. But I was doing some work with this guy where he did more body-based work. And it was a group process, but it comes to my turn. And they put the attention on me, and he starts leading me through some, guiding me essentially into my body. And within 5 minutes, I kid you not, I was on my back and I was sobbing, full body sobbing. My voice was cracking and I had my arms up in the air and I was saying hold me, mom, where are you? Kind of a little baby, a little kid. And I actually was in that moment, this deeply hurt, alone, shadowy part of myself came to the surface, and I got to actually make contact with, wow, there's this incredibly malnourished, neglected young boy inside of me that has been in so much pain for so many years, that at that time, I was coping with booze and porn and anything to, kind of regulate my nervous system. But when I experienced that, I was like, whoa, I had no idea that was in there. What just happened there? Because, my body released something that I hadn't been able to get to in years of therapy. And it's not that you can't get there in therapy. It just, this happened to be the right spot for me. But what happened was, that was probably the pivotal moment where I actually started to change. Because suddenly this part of me that had been unconscious, right, a part of my nervous system that I wasn't even aware of was so desperate for feminine nurturing and touch. Like the gas tank was just empty. That part of me had been showing up every time I was around a woman, right? And most women don't want to mother a little boy. They want a romantic partner, right? And so I wasn't realizing it, but that little part of me, that neediness, was showing up in all my interactions with the feminine. And as I got in touch with that, I started to be able to form a relationship with that part of me and nurture that part of me, and then get more connection from other men, as we'll talk about. And it stopped running the show, so to speak. So instead of that little boy showing up, I was able to show up as an adult that had needs and could speak to them in a much more straightforward way. But all that, like, what's going on in my nervous system and why am I so confused? It all traced to that. So it was that shift from the mental prepared me, so to speak. It gave me the map of what was happening in my life. But that was the first time I went into the territory and was like, wow, there is so much information and energy stored in our bodies and our tissues that, whether we're conscious of it or not, often mandate our behavior. And if we're not conscious of it, we'll often try to get those needs met through other ways that are ultimately not quite as fulfilling. And that's where a lot of men these days, right, get into have a real challenge in that. More than ever, right, whatever pain or emotion or need in our nervous system there's some kind of instant quick fix, hit of sugar, dopamine, social media, porn, like so many different things that we'll turn to. And all the while, we're not actually addressing the root cause underneath.
Right. I was chatting with a friend the other day, and she said, this world isn't for the faint of heart. And you might think, oh, wow, back in the day when people were hunter and gatherers, life must have been so tough. It's difficult. But, I would argue that it's all difficult. I mean, it's just different challenges, right? Today, I mean, if you gave the hunter and gatherers unlimited sugar and Hershey chocolates, like, of course, they would probably succumb to their own, addictions too. So today it's interesting because we face so many easy avenues to addiction, escapism, channels to avoid our, subconsciously developed, things that we've kind of suppressed. And I just find that so fascinating when you're chatting about the idea of subconscious to conscious release via the body, right? And how the body stores things of that nature, especially trauma, problems. Even like, for example, if you go through a stressful event, sometimes your body will tense up, and you might be even locked in that position for so long that you forget that you're so tensed all the time that you just slowly become a different person because of this lack of conscious awareness of it, which I find so interesting. But all this is to lead me to ask, maybe some people don't have access to body work or somebody that can help them with the shadow work, or maybe they feel uncomfortable or nervous to go in a group or can't afford it. What are some of these solutions or suggestions do you have for people to do what you got to experience, or maybe bring about more awareness?
Yeah, well, it takes an intention and a desire, in a sense of like, okay, I want to look at the parts of me that I'm not aware of or have been neglecting or dissociated from. Maybe the root of it in so many ways is, with all those distractions and medications we're offered these days, oftentimes our first impulse is to get away from feeling. And kind of if there was a golden rule, so to speak, of this work, I've found is the most powerful path of transformation is to always turn towards our actual felt body experience, whether that's grief or anger or sadness, or disgust or self-loathing. these different things that come up in our nervous system. And then you're right, for whatever reason, sometimes it's cultural programming, family, just capacity. We don't have the capacity to fully be with it in the moment. So we have to like stop it and hold it. And then that stuff stores up in our body. Like there's more and more research coming out in particular, right? That the fascia, the kind of thing that connects all of our tissues, that's where a lot of this tension gets stored. And, I work pretty closely with a doctor of Chinese medicine. And, he started doing some of this work with me, shadow work, because what he found was he was helping patients with autoimmune disorders and all kinds of bodily problems, but it wasn't really shifting them because they weren't getting to the material underneath. And this stuff, particularly, I would argue for us men, as we hit mid-30s on, it catches up to us. Our bodies, like it really manifests in our bodies as chronic illnesses or pains or all kinds of different things. And so
when they say someone's hard shelled, it's almost as if it's true.
Yeah, no, totally. Right. Yeah. And, we learn to do all that for all kinds of reasons culturally that we can, kind of peel apart later. But it's true. We got to that first experience I had on the floor crying, the felt body experience was my heart actually cracked open. I was like, whoa, I'm having access to something in my body mind that was sealed off to protect me for so long. But so the turning towards emotions is really big, as is just, in a sense, relentlessly practicing to get into our bodies, right? Whether that's working out, different types of somatic meditations. I mean, you can, whatever it is, when we're in our bodies, we tend to feel more. And so different types of breath work, there's so much available to us these days that we have access to. That's the cool thing about right now, right? Is you can go on YouTube and literally have access to more knowledge than the most wealthy, learned person, 500 years ago. Like it's all there and across cultures, right? Like the global knowledge pile is all accessible to us. So that's really key, is getting into your body, turning towards feelings, and then, over time, building some kind of community where that is a shared destination, so to speak, because we are just socially wired creatures. We are meant to grow and thrive and grieve and feel in community. It's, we're just kind of coming out of what I think is going to be this really interesting kind of barbaric blip in time where, here in the West, at least, modernization, industrialization allowed this level of like individualism and agency that had never really existed before. Like, to survive for most of human history, you had to be connected to people and relating to them. Yeah. And these days, part of, again, what's causing a lot of issues with men is you don't. You can order everything online, connect online. And so many men I know are deeply isolated. So they don't have other nervous systems, other people to co-regulate with. And that has a pretty big, significant impact on us. And, I think that we're like at a threshold moment where we're turning the tides of that. But, like when I was growing up, my parents were raised in the like Dr. Spock generation of like the prevailing wisdom was, oh, your baby's crying. Leave it in the crib and let it cry itself out. And that's going to build resiliency. And that is never how it was done before, right? Even when you just think of how infants were cared for in most human history, families lived together, there was tribal connections. The baby was always being held by someone. So if it wasn't mom and dad, it was auntie or uncle or cousin or friend or family or whoever. And there was a level of connection there that the whole kind of nuclear family bullshit that was invented in the 50s, like decimated. And suddenly it's like, no, mom needs to take a shower. So baby, you're going to sit alone and not be held. And I think we're just reckoning, this is just big conjecture on my part, but we're reckoning culturally with this massive shift that happened in that sense. And then we're all growing up into adults wondering, why am I so anxious all the time? And I don't feel good and connected and relaxed in my body. Some of that's there. all of the intense stimulation we're getting is there. So maybe a long-winded answer to your question, but yeah, turn towards your feelings, get into your body, and try to develop community where that's a priority.
Mm-hmm. I'd also say that being comfortable in loneliness can also be a strength as well. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think there's I sometimes say, like, there's a difference between isolation and loneliness. So, right, isolation means we can literally be by ourselves, but feel connected.
Yeah.
To our community, to the world around us. I think what a lot of people are feeling now is actual loneliness. So I'm around people all day, but I feel alone. Right. And that's like an existential grief and sadness that I think is often true for people. In, I could certainly, we could spend a whole podcast on why that is in a sense, but, again, some of our development, I think, puts that to blame in that for many people, when we're as disconnected from the natural world as we are, it gets lonely.
Yeah.
Right. Like we actually don't feel part of the whole system around us. And, one of the most popular things in men's work these days is to get connected to other men in nature. And it's like the double whammy of when you actually start to plug back into that natural world, it's hard to feel lonely because you realize, oh, I'm not alone. I'm part of a whole system of weather and animals and bees and trees that has been, perpetuating itself for eons and will continue to. And that kind of brings something back online. And, it's also, I would say, one of the struggles right now is, there's so much great about technology in that you and I can connect over something like this, which was not, really possible 30 years ago. But the downside is I think it's confusing a lot of people because we get like the sugar version of connection. Oh, I'll hop on Instagram and I get to see what's up with my people. And it kind of feels like connection, but it's not actually connection. There's not a reciprocal, real-time co-regulation really happening there. And again, another example of, I think, how people can, that they're lonely in a sense of not feeling connected, which I think is different from many men I do work with. It's really important to not fear isolation, but that's actually much easier to do when you feel connected to the world around you, if that makes sense.
Right. So what do you suggest from people, and I guess particularly even men that feel this sense of loneliness? Is it all about community at that point? Is that the main focus here?
That's my kind of the major medicine I prescribe to men these days is we got to reject, particularly here in the US, this kind of myth of the lone wolf, rugged individual cowboy. You do it all alone. You're tough. You're the Marlboro man. You don't show weakness. You figure it out. And it's bullshit. I mean, it's total bullshit that we're fed. And instead we end up dying and suffering inside or becoming addicted to things. So one of the big shifts I try to guide men on is getting connected to other men or women, human beings, but I specialize in men working with men. They're your allies, right? And the more you reveal yourself to them, the more you're going to feel seen. And the more you feel seen, often the more connected we feel. And it's not that life gets easier in community, in my experience, but it does get a lot better. Meaning that stressful stuff is still going to come your way no matter what, but there's an increased resiliency when we're connected, when we're in community, when we're not feeling that loneliness per se. There's, oh, wow, I have someone to talk to about this tragedy in my life or this thing that happened. And that is so transformative for men. I mean, so transformative because so many men don't even know what type of connection is possible until I get them in a room with some other men and they're like, wow, I didn't even know this was a choice. that I
Right.
could, bring my full self forward and be vulnerable and still be strong and get support along the way.
Right. So, what would you suggest for the men out there that are on board with what you're saying, but don't know where to go from there because they've never been vulnerable before, so they don't know who to trust or how vulnerable they can be? Do you suggest a therapist? Where do they go from here?
Yeah, there's so many paths. I'm definitely on the bandwagon of just like we go to the gym to work out our bodies and keep them healthy, going to a therapist is just a way to keep yourself healthy. There's a huge judgment, I think, from a lot of men in particular, that therapy is you only go to therapy if you're broken or messed up, right? Which is just not true. It's hygiene, right? It's mental, emotional hygiene. So that's one really powerful thing. And I generally recommend working with a somatic therapist. So someone who is going to connect you to your body and bodily sensations in that very real and visceral way. That's super key. Building community, particularly for men, can start as simply as finding another guy or two. You just have a sense that, oh yeah, these two might be open to something, a deeper connection here. And you kind of plant the flag and you're like, hey, I would love to meet up sometime where we just spend a little time, 10, 15 minutes each, like sharing about what's actually happening in our lives. Like just cutting beneath the surface, right? So many of us men are taught to relate via triangulation, so it's me and you, and our attention is on a third thing, whether that's sports or an activity or fixing cars or you name it. But our attention, it's us looking at this third thing. And there's a time and place for that. But the type of connection I'm talking about is we get together and we put our attention on each other. Hey, what's happening for you in your life? Where are you thriving? Where are you in pain? Right? What's not working? Right. And it's amazing how once men get into a space like that, sometimes I can't shut them up. Like there's so much to be shared because they've never had a space to share it before. And just as simple as that, right? Guiding a friend or two to a deeper conversation can be so healing. And then, again, the nice thing about where we're at right now is, you used to have to try to find men's groups or men's community local, but there's so much available online these days too. So even if you can't find something near you, you can join groups over Zoom. And while, I think the deepest dose is always in person, it's amazing how much medicine you can get just from sitting in a virtual room with people and sharing and being real and honest. And I think the important thing about that is something that was so key to me on my journey, like I said, was when I got exposed to men who were deeper and farther along their journey than I was, and got to see in a firsthand an experience in my body how they were showing up in the world. And it was like light bulbs of, I was around some older men, and it was just like they walked in the room, and seeing them talk, I was like, that's it. That's what I want to be when I get old. Like, however you're holding yourself, your presence, how you're dealing with conflict, like that's the map, that's the model. And so just by spending time with them, I started to deepen as a man, to get to know myself better, to get to know how to handle my nerves better, all of that different stuff. There's an actual transmission, of wisdom in a sense. It doesn't have to just be from people older than us. There's all kinds of different ways this can come. But that's one of the great, I think, things that got decimated in the last decades is these kind of different types of connections that we used to get from elders or people across our community, or aunts and uncles. Like, there's just something so important about spending time with other people who in some ways or shape or form are a little deeper than us. Because, I see this all the time for guys. They're in a space with a man, and that man gets very vulnerable, maybe shares something that's just tearing them up inside and tears come, or that man gets really angry and expresses a strong boundary or moves some energy. But in both instances, they're fully connected to themselves. They're fully connected to the space around them. And men are like, wow, I've never seen a man cry like that felt so strong. Or I've never seen a man emote that much anger and yet still feel totally safe to be around, right? Not some reactive, explosive, destructive anger, but like full fire and totally there, totally trustable. That's the kind of stuff that you get when you start to spend time in these spaces, and get that embodied firsthand kind of transmission. So it's great to lead stuff, with people, but at some point, I'm also just going to strongly suggest seek out people who are further along the journey than you, whether that's through workshops or men's groups or, in some sense, that's, I think, why a lot of people get attracted to podcasts like this, because we get to get these incredible deep transmissions of wisdom from people we might not ever meet otherwise. Right. And it can be transformative.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when you were talking about earlier about this notion that we've created about having the macho man, the man that keeps everything to himself, the emotions to himself, he's the anchor to everybody's, to everybody's sail, right? That's blowing in the wind. I've seen it firsthand myself when observing others. You can see it on their face, them holding, like, especially as the years go on, you can see that pain being held. You can see the body tense or harden almost. You can almost physically see it compared to somebody else, right? That's very free flowing. And I think you mentioned energies earlier, and I think part of that ends up becoming this vibrational state where people, as you get older and older, people don't want to be around somebody that's hardened and, kind of holds all this anger because they don't know how to release it, and they don't want it to be the target of where it's released. So it's you start to see that, and I think that's really important. Also, you mentioned this idea of earlier about community and being surrounded by people and even nature and animals, and it really reminded me of, I spent 6 months in India, and time to time I was with my parents, but there was a lot of moments I was, by myself. I was alone, but I'd never felt lonely. Even though I didn't really know anybody there, I had this sense of community. There was animals everywhere. I mean, in India especially, they just let animals roam. So it felt like I was in tune with nature almost, if that makes sense. I felt I belonged. And beyond the cultural aspect, more of just a nature aspect and a community aspect, I felt that I was there. I didn't feel lonely, which was very interesting. It was very peaceful, right? And then coming back to the US, it was very night and day eye-opening about how isolated people are here. How, in a different podcast with another guest, we talked about this idea of being surrounded by dead things, right? Technology, four corners of a house, all the walls, you're just surrounded by dead material. I mean, how many people have house plants that they take care of? Or, I guess today it's very popular to have pets, but even then, you're very limited on your surrounding of living things, to the point where, you almost lose touch with that serenity. And have you experienced that with the people you've worked with?
Yeah, again, that's such a beautiful story. Right. It's that feeling a part of, right? When I'm a part of something larger, it's hard to feel as lonely, right? When it's like, wow, there's life everywhere around me and I'm connected to that and it's connected to me. And I mean, here in the US, and, and I think a lot of Western cultures, right? Things, but particularly in the US, there's this just massive, like prioritization of private, right? Success is having the big mansion all to yourself, or having a really fancy car you drive in alone, right? There's just this emphasis on being, in a bubble of your own, and privatization in a sense. And I think that's really catching up with our mental health here. And, at least in the worlds I swim in, people are really getting curious about alternative ways to cohabit and live again. Of like, I think COVID really, for a lot of people, kind of woke us up to, wow, we do live pretty disconnected lives. And that just intensified it. There were men I was working with during that time that if they weren't on a Zoom call with me or my community, it was like, there was no connection in their lives. They were working remotely, just it's pretty intense, and it has an impact on our nervous systems. So doing the work I do, particularly in groups, on retreat or in nature, and seeing that come back alive, like you're totally right. Like men's bodies soften. Like it's the craziest thing. I often see it around their eyes and their jaw and their face. And there's just like life force. Chi comes back. Mm-hmm. The breath is deeper. There's just like more of a regulation, a connection to the earth, and to the space around them. And there's this realization of, oh, this is actually normal. What we're being fed out there is the abnormal, right? And so that being a part of, like you said, I think some people definitely experience it, traveling in nature, where there's different ways that different cultures and societies still prioritize the collective or the communal in ways that we just really don't here in the States right now, that cause a lot of pain for men. And then they wonder why they're depressed or anxious, or, all these different things men sometimes come to me with. And it's like, well, who are you connected to in your life? What do you feel part of? And they're like, nothing. And that's often just the starting point for so much heartbreak.
Right. Have you read, you're very deep into this topics, so I'm curious, have you read The Superior Man or books of that nature?
Yeah. David Dado is actually my teacher's teacher. So I've studied in his lineage for many, many years. Yeah, it was doing the work, so to speak, in my 30s. But yeah, I'm very familiar.
Yeah, that book was incredible. And we can get into this for sure in a minute. I read that book, and it really, definitely have to reread it a few times. It's so dense, but there were so many great ideas. And one that really stuck with me was, and I was telling this to a friend, was growing up, I came from India to the US, very strict parents. So, idea of dating was not in our culture. The idea of talking to girls and things like that is just forbidden almost, right? So for me, going through the US Western public school, I was very comfortable just chatting with guys and girls alike. And, as I got older and older, it still was a very easy process. But I always wondered as to why there was this difficulty at times for me or for other men talking to women in particular. And something that book highlighted that made a lot of sense to me, which I was telling my friend, was this idea of just embracing like feminine energy without expectation, right? I think part of that intense anxiety is expectation, right? Is she gonna like me back? Am I supposed to ask her out on a date? What if she laughs? Just zero expectations. And I think that's part of reflecting on my experiences growing up. I had no expectations because I was raised in such a strict household. It was like, you guys are just all my friends. It doesn't matter. So it was very easy for me, right? So, and I told my friend that, and I think that holds very true. I don't know what your thoughts are, but it seems to make a lot of sense when you just go into interactions with zero expectations based on, you probably know a lot more about this than me, but what do you think?
Well, that ties so much into why one of the many reasons I guide men towards male community in men's groups is part of what makes this so intense for a lot of men right now is, we're raised in this kind of man box, bro, machismo, male culture, locker room culture. Never show weakness, make fun of each other. You always got to be the best. That's like what a lot of men of us men are raised from. And so we don't feel comfortable bringing our full selves necessarily to other men, but we're human beings that have emotional needs. And so for many men, the only place they feel comfortable bringing their emotions is sometimes to an intimate partner.
Yeah.
And so suddenly the desire to have connection with the woman is so powerful because they don't have a lot of connection elsewhere. So it kind of gets layered on, and it creates expectation and actual need of like, well, I feel lonely if I'm not with this woman. And I've seen many men get into relationships that were not a great idea or were unhealthy because they were afraid, right, of feeling alone. But that as men, as we get our connection needs met, it doesn't have to just be through other men, but community or friends and family, that neediness often goes down, right? And then we can show up in a different way to pursuing intimate partners of like, the sweet spot of having desire, but not the need. Like, yeah, I'd love for this to work with you. And if not, I'm going to be okay because I got a great life and I love my life and I feel connected. I feel part of, all these things we've been talking about. But when the tank is empty, so to speak, and a man is not already passionate or feeling connected or thriving in his life, all of that drives a certain type of need in the connection to the feminine. And that doesn't work because then the feminine feels that of, wow, this man's not free. He's not already free. He needs something from me to be free. I can't trust that. It's kind of one of the central principles of David's work. So whoever, and it doesn't just have to be men, but whoever's kind of cultivating the masculine pole in any intimate relationship, our job is to work that, to cultivate feeling free in our lives, right? Which just means, satisfied, content, alive, connected, passionate. And when we can do that, then paradoxically, we become even more attractive to the feminine. It's like, oh, you don't need anything from me. I can bring my whole self to you. It's totally fine. Like, I think, which was kind of that experience you had of, you're like, yeah, no, I feel great. I connect with whoever. So, it just happens to be you. Fine. Like awesome.
Right. And I truly believe that, like you mentioned at the beginning of this episode about how it all starts at the philosophical and mental, is how our internal projection is what we project outwards, right? So if you don't feel confident, people will see that. And I say this all the time. If you have a big goal, big aspirations, you want to do something, but you don't fully believe in yourself and you're searching for somebody else to believe in you, it's not going to happen, because it happens the other way around. The projection of internal belief shows to everybody else that you have a strong enough conviction for them to want to believe back into your dreams, right? So it's almost, you project what you want into this reality, and reality reciprocates or reflects it back. So same thing, right? So it's like the same thing with what you're talking about, having no desire, no expectation, is you feel so whole that people see that, and men and women alike are more attracted to you, to want to become your friend or want to get to know you or do business with you, because they can feel that energy, vibration, or whatever you're projecting out there. I mean, that's kind of a takeaway I got.
Totally. It's a big part of the work I will do with men, in that, our relationship to ourself evokes how other people relate to us. Right. Like so if we have a certain view of ourselves, we're carrying that into every interaction we have, and people are feeling that in us. Oh, he relates to himself in that way. And that completely changes how they interact with us. And again, I'll kind of tie this, just because everything I do, I always bring back to men's groups. One of the great things about community like this is sometimes it takes a little while, or for many of us men and humans, our self-image is the last thing to update. So maybe we've actually been working hard, we've been losing weight or showing up differently in our jobs and our relationships, but we'll still be connected to this story of ourselves from when we were most deepest in our pain, and we won't see it. But other community, people around us that care about us and know us intimately, they can often see it. Like, no, man, you're showing up totally differently. Like, that's not you at all. Or, wow, no, I see you as very alive and very confident moving towards what you want. And one of the big shifts, again, many men make in the work they do with me is learning to trust how other people in these tight communities see them more than they see themselves. It's kind of like a little leap of faith of like, okay, 8 of you are telling me, I'm not a piece of shit, like literally or something. So the choice point becomes either 8 of you are wrong or my self-identity is a little wonky here. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust how you see me because, and these aren't just, these are cultivated relationships of intention. And that starts to change things where it's like, wow, no, okay, you're right. I am showing up differently. And then our self-image slowly starts to update. And then we get even more of what we want, in a sense, like, because we're showing up in this different way, which attracts even more of that in a sense.
And I think the funny part is what I'm sure you probably have to focus on breaking is this confirmation bias, right? Because we want 10 out of 10 people to say, no, you're not a piece of shit. But our confirmation bias looks at the 2 and we might hyper fixate and be like, see, I told you, and forget that 80, you're not going to have everybody like you in this world, but having those 8 people tell you that, maybe you're wrong. Maybe you're projecting yourself in the wrong way, right?
Yeah. It's another thing I've had to do myself, and with a lot of men I work with, is starting to really be discerning about whose opinions and judgments we care about. Right? Do I care about the one random person commenting on my social media feed, or do I care about the man in my life who knows me, my history, my journey, what I want, what I've been working towards, and what I orient guys to is, well, the latter, right? Because that's a man who actually knows you. So if he tells me, hey man, what you're doing there feels pretty off, like what's going on with you, calls me forward or something, or I trust that because he actually knows me versus, right, some of that confirmation bias, that negativity bias, like these are people who don't actually know us. They've maybe seen us online, or, a woman who we just met at the store, it's all kinds of stuff. And again, like as we kind of get those people in our lives who we trust at this deeper level, because we've revealed kind of the depths of ourselves to, and they've earned the right to hold our stories and know our interiors, warts and all. As we learn to prioritize those people, it starts to kind of provide us a level of immunity out in the world, right? Like one man I work with recently, I loved his phrase. It's so simple. He's like, community is immunity. When you have the right community, it builds resilience in your life of like, okay, well, I don't have to worry about them because what I do care about is, these people close to me in my life and what they think, because they actually know me. They know, what I'm striving for. And so I'm just going to focus on them, and I can pay attention to this stuff out there, but I don't have to let it tank me, because the people that really know me, they're like, no man, you're growing, you're changing, you're showing up, you're doing good work, or whatever that might be.
Just not too long ago, just to preface this, in today's day and age, sometimes I think the topics of masculinity, masculine, feminine energy, these things have become so taboo or uncomfortable to even discuss, today, because there's just so much backlash when you immediately discuss it. And I experienced this myself just even, not too long ago, maybe a month or 2 ago, talking about these ideas of masculine and feminine energy and this yin and yang nature of 2 people that, of connectivity. And I experienced so much backlash for having this philosophy or thinking this way. And, I would, to put it lightly, I guess I would say these people that were giving me the backlash weren't always the most consciously aware of what's going on, right, with themselves, with society, of that nature. But, I'd say that's a lot of people today, is they're so programmed into whatever you want to call it, the matrix, society, generational fixations, whatever you want to call it. But there's so many people that are programmed to the point where open-mindedness is no longer an option when it comes to communicating. It's agree with me or don't talk about it. And
Yeah,
I don't know, have you experienced this and in your line of work? Because, you know, you've read a lot of these
sure.
books and this idea of yin yang energies and
Yeah, it's deeply uncomfortable for some people. And, since David wrote Way of the Superior Man, a lot of the people that have kind of carried the torch forward with his work are actually moving away from masculine and feminine, just because those words are so loaded culturally for us
yeah.
in terms of expectations and roles. But the truth is they're not the expectations and the roles, right? These are just, you can call it yin and yang, you can call it, um, go and flow, feeling and perspective, stillness and movement, consciousness and light, would be the most pure version from the David's lineage. But right, like sometimes when I'm working with people around this, it's like, so think of something like the deep desert, say Death Valley, or the peak of a very tall mountain, right? You can just start with one of those, and you just you feel into it and what it evokes energetically. And then if I say something like, all right, now feel into Kauai in Hawaii or the rainforest, it evokes a different kind of energy.
Right.
Right. So these energies exist outside of human beings. So somewhere like the deep desert is very sparse, vast. There's not a lot of movement. There's life there, but it's much more small scale. It's more delicate. It's more slow moving. There's not as much abundance. Or the, peak of mountains. It's cold. There's a lot of rock.
Yeah.
It's kind of barren in some sense. And then you go to like Hawaii or the rainforest, and it is just overflowing with sights and smells and sounds and life and green. And one plot of land might look completely different 4 weeks from now for whatever reason. And that's kind of just what we're talking about here, of these energies, and they exist, right? The other way to think about this is just, there's the part of us that sees, and then there's whatever can be seen.
Yeah.
Just two natural perspectives, right? Like that are just in the world. Whatever you call them, they're there. It just so happens that these then those energies manifest in certain ways in human dynamics. And what's exciting about right now, actually, is those energies are being liberated from their physical forms. So for a long time, right, feminine energy mostly came through female bodies, and masculine energy mostly came through male bodies. That's not the case anymore. It's all getting shaken up. And there's so much more fluidity, particularly in younger generations we're seeing, being able to move back and forth or being balanced or whatever it might be. And that's all awesome. But it still is important to acknowledge there's these two poles of energy that we can bring in any given moment, right? For some men I work with, what do they need? They need to get still. For the first time in their lives, they need to sit on a cushion and still their body and just get quiet. For other men I work with, they need to open and get into their bodies and dance and get massage and get some life force and loosen things up and make some noise and feel that energetic movement, right, coming through them. One is not better than the other, but there's at different moments, each medicine is more effective than the other. Yeah. And so what we're being asked to do culturally now is navigate these things with more fluidity, right? I also find for a lot of people, it really works just to use the metaphor of partner dance, something like tango. For it to work, like for it to really work, there has to be a lead and a follow. If both people try to follow, it does not work. If both people try to lead, it does not work.
Mm-hmm.
One is not better than the other. You can see it's very challenging to lead, and you have to be really strong to just follow, right? To just, okay, I'm just going to surrender here. One is not, what I would say better than the other, but they're both incredibly important capacities. So I get that there's a lot of charge around these things. And even in the work I do, people get a little upset. Does that mean I always have to be this way? And it's like, no, but you have to understand kind of the energies, because they're kind of the materials for art, the art of our lives, right? You can paint with one of these two brushes and the whole spectrum in between. But if you don't understand them, it's hard to paint with them. And at different times, we need different things. So in men's group, paradoxically, I do a lot of masculine practice for guys, the kind of stillness, calming down, connecting to the infinite. But one of the primary, I guess, benefits I often see for men is in men's group, they get to drop in to the more feminine side of just being seen, of expressing their emotions, of being messy, of being vulnerable, of not having to hold it all together, which so many men feel like they have to do. And that is transformative for them. So men's group actually allows a lot of men to deeply connect to their inner feeling, their inner emotions, their inner, we could call it the feminine, but you can call it whatever you want. That's so important for being alive and for being vital. So yeah, it's delicate because the words can trigger things for people. But I think when, through all kinds of experiential exercises or even guided things, sometimes you can just show people that, or just very simply, right? There's life and there's death.
Yeah.
Right? There is life and there's death. And they have very different, when you feel each one, they feel very different.
Right. And even in the Superior Man book, I think the author does a very good job expressing that it's not always masculinity is man, femininity is women or female, and how there is this sense of duality in each individual. And, if you look at the genotype of any human to be born, DNA from a father and a mother, which gives you that duality of energy. So each of us would have a sense of feminine and masculine energies. And what I connected just from what you were talking about that I think is interesting is perhaps when we were talking about earlier about a man that's a hardened shell, is that feminine energy never got its outlet, right? Is so strong on the yin that the yang never got to flow, and the channel was blocked. Therefore, you see that buildup of energy never released, and I think that's incredibly interesting.
Yeah, it's real, and so all human beings have both. We both have the masculine. We both have feminine, right? The part of you that witnesses. In kind of more the Eastern traditions, the part of you that witnesses, that's the eternal masculine, right? It's the one thing in your body mind that has never changed.
Yeah.
Is the part of you that's been aware of everything. That is the masculine.
Right.
Everything you can see, everything you can feel, that's the feminine. So we all have tons of feminine inside of us. And again, it's just about learning these two tools so we can kind of use them as instruments. And where this work is most, applicable in a sense is then in intimate relationships, right? These are tools we can use when we want to erotically charge a relationship. It does not mean you have to use these things all day long in every part of your relationship 24/7. And a lot of men I know read, something like Way of the Superior Man and like, oh my God, I always have to be the tree. I always have to hold space for the storm in my life. And it's like, no, in moments and times, if what you're desiring is a highly feminine partner, yes, but not all the time. These are tools we can use in a moment. And they're tools we can use, I think, sometimes to diagnose and support ourselves in our life and our growth. Like we said, of, oh my God, I might I have not been feeling my whole life, right? Or there's other men, who are too much on the just flow feeling spectrum and are having a hard time getting that sense of direction in moving towards something in their life, and do need a little bit more masculine oriented practice. Again, one is not better than the other, but it's just important to understand them so then we can create what we want to create in life. I guess maybe that's another way to point it, is these are two of the primal energies of creation. I mean, literally how things are created, right? That's how life gets created. As things are evolved, are these two different forces.
I like how you're saying it, right? This idea of bringing it all back is having this conscious awareness of figuring out who you are and balancing both those energies within, right? Maybe, and this isn't to say it's a perfect 50-50, your masculine, feminine energy. Maybe you're 60-40 or whatever it is, figuring out your balance to become whole, which is the important part, is the 100%, right? Is figuring out that. And, I think that's incredible. But Jason, I do have one more question for you. This show is called Learn or Be Learned. So I always ask my guests this closing question of, what is one thing that either you learned from someone or you want the audience to learn from your own life experience that you would like to share?
Yeah, let me feel into what wants to come through here around that. And I would say, again, I'm going to tie it back into the first part of what I said earlier. The cheat code, if there is one, I have found to increasing wholeness in my life is to turn towards my experience, whatever it is in the moment. So, one meditation teacher I know, Shinzen Young, he has this great formula, right? That suffering is equal to pain times resistance. And so much of our lives, we resist feeling whatever it is we're feeling. And that resistance is the big multiplier.
Yeah.
There's always going to be pain in life, right? Hard things are always going to happen. And for men in particular, we are not taught the tools for how to be with the hard stuff in our body minds that we want to feel. And so learning and consciously making this shift of, wait, the best thing I can do in this moment is to actually turn right towards the sensation I'm having in my body and be with it. Maybe the rage I'm feeling, or anger, or heartbreak, or loneliness, or whatever it might be. We think, oh, I can't do that because that's going to feel so awful. But that's the magic moment that often metabolizes and starts to transmute our bodily experience and help us move forward in some ways. But it's so counterintuitive. And the more we try to resist feeling something, like you were talking about, that the magic ingredient to the world, the more we actually tend to perpetuate it, right? The more it keeps showing up in our lives. And so there is this kind of deep willingness to turn towards our experience. And I'm learning this lesson still, at 43 years old, having to teach this work and have been in it for a long time. And there'll still be things that, will start to creep up in my body, and I'll notice some tightening or a discomfort, and I'll kind of be, I don't know, I'm just going to avoid that for weeks or sometimes months or whatever. And then oftentimes for me, it's like in a men's group or with my therapist or something. Finally, they'll guide me, or I'll usually takes maybe 3 minutes. To actually be with the emotional experience, as painful as it is or scary as it is, usually only takes a few minutes. And then I feel completely differently, and there's more space inside myself on the other end. And I always end up thinking, oh my God, why did I just waste 5 weeks trying to avoid that? Like, I just spent so much energy holding that versus just turning towards and being with it, and then allowing that to inform, my next decision or action. So, in an episode I did with one guy I work with, maybe I'll sum this up as one of the great shifts to think about is to um, is to move away from enlightenment towards intimacy. So enlightenment, part of what we're sold, and again, it's kind of the masculine side of spiritual practice, is to get away from our experience. Literally, I'm going to transcend my bodily experience. And there's a time and place for that. But for many people I know, the hack to getting there actually is to go the other direction, is to become deeply intimate with our experience in the moment and to touch it completely, right? Whatever's going on inside of us. And then it's like through sheer magic, like transcendence happens once we're fully with first. So maybe it's that one of the great hacks in life is to emphasize intimacy, and then enlightenment will often come.
I love that, being present in the moment, taking the full experience of today, because yesterday's already gone. You're always not guaranteed tomorrow. And the only thing you can truly embrace is the now. And honestly, your wisdom was incredible, Jason. I appreciate you being on the show. I'm really looking forward to the audience hearing you out and hearing what we had to say. I'm very grateful for you being here today.
Yeah, so honored to be here. Fantastic dropping in with you. You clearly are a deep man, so it's always a pleasure for me, and look forward to connecting more in the future.
For sure. Thank you.